In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis drew a map. He was working in Constantinople, sitting in the Ottoman Imperial Library, copying from older source maps that he had collected from across the known world. He noted in the margins of his finished work that some of his source materials were very old. How old he could not say precisely. He only knew that they had come from libraries and collections that predated the current era of exploration. The map he produced showed the coastline of South America with remarkable accuracy for 1513. It also showed Antarctica. Not approximately. Not vaguely. The Piri Reis map shows the coastline of Antarctica in specific detail, including features of the subglacial coast, the actual rock coastline beneath the ice, that were not confirmed by modern survey equipment until 1949. In 1949, a joint British, Swedish, and Norwegian expedition used seismic sounding technology to map the coastline of Antarctica beneath its ice sheet for the first time. The results of that survey were compared with the Piri Reis map by a geography professor named Charles Hapgood in 1959. His conclusion was direct. The Piri Reis map showed the subglacial coastline of Antarctica with an accuracy that was impossible to achieve without first-hand survey of an ice-free coast. Antarctica has been covered in ice for at least 15 million years according to the official scientific timeline. That is the official timeline. And the Piri Reis map is not the only problem with it. Let us start with what Antarctica actually is, physically, because the official story skips over the most important details. Antarctica is a continent. A real continent. Not a frozen ocean like the Arctic. A landmass the size of Europe and Australia combined, sitting at the bottom of the world under an ice sheet that in some places is 4 kilometers thick. The ice is so heavy that it has pushed the actual rock surface of the continent below sea level in some regions. If you remove the ice, parts of Antarctica would sit as deep as 2.5 kilometers below sea level simply from the weight of what is on top of them. That ice is approximately 30 million cubic kilometers of frozen water. It contains 70% of all the fresh water on Earth. And according to mainstream science it has been sitting there, largely unchanged, for 15 million years. Here is the first problem with that number. Ice cores drilled from the Antarctic ice sheet and analyzed over the last 40 years tell a story that does not match the 15 million year stability model cleanly. Deep ice cores, the ones drilled from close to the bedrock, show chemical signatures and biological material that indicate the ice sheet has not always been uniformly present. There are layers in the deep ice that show pollen. Trees. Temperate plant matter. Biological content consistent with a landscape that was, at some point, green. Not tropical. Not warm in a modern sense. But vegetated. Functional. Capable of supporting plant life. The official scientific explanation for these layers is that they represent interglacial periods, warm phases that occurred millions of years ago when the ice retreated partially and then returned. This explanation is scientifically defensible. Antarctica has had warmer periods in its very deep geological past. The problem is the dates. Some of the biological material in the deep ice cores does not date to millions of years ago. Some of it dates to a period that is much more recent in geological terms. Recent enough that it overlaps uncomfortably with the timelines of human civilization. Recent enough that it creates a question nobody in official science wants to answer directly. And then there is the Piri Reis map sitting on top of all of this. In 1960, the United States Air Force Strategic Air Command had their cartography division examine the Piri Reis map in detail. They were specifically asked to assess whether the map could show the subglacial coastline of Antarctica and whether that coastline matched their own survey data. The Air Force cartographers confirmed that it did. The official response to this confirmation was not to open an investigation into how a 1513 map showed a coastline that was not confirmed until 1949. The official response was to classify the question as unanswered and move on. The Air Force correspondence on this matter is available in partially declassified form. The specific letter confirming that the Piri Reis map matched the subglacial coastline was written by Harold Z. Ohlmeyer, a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and addressed to Charles Hapgood directly. That letter exists. It has been in public circulation since Hapgood published it in his 1966 book. Nobody in the official scientific establishment has ever directly addressed what it implies. They have simply not addressed it. Now here is where the story becomes about more than one map. In 1737, a French geographer named Philippe Buache produced a map of Antarctica that showed the continent divided into two land masses by a large interior sea or channel running through the middle. This was 40 years before Antarctica was officially discovered by European explorers in 1820. When modern survey technology mapped the subglacial topography of Antarctica in the 20th century, it confirmed that Antarctica is in fact divided into two major land masses by a subglacial basin. If you remove the ice, there would be a significant interior sea or channel running through the continent approximately where Buache drew it. Buache drew a map of something he could not have seen. And he drew it accurately. He was known to have worked from older source materials. He was explicit about this. He noted in his published geographic work that he relied on ancient charts and older mapping traditions when producing work on poorly known regions. Where did those older charts come from? Who made the original surveys that Buache and Piri Reis were copying from? Nobody is asking these questions in official academic or scientific channels. The questions are too large. The implications of taking them seriously are too disruptive to too many things that the established timeline of human history requires to be true. Because if Antarctica was surveyed by someone before it was covered in ice, and if that surveying happened at a time when human civilizations capable of ocean navigation and systematic cartography existed, then there are people in the history of this planet who knew about a continent that official history says was not discovered until 1820, and those people were operating at a level of geographic knowledge and navigational capability that does not fit anywhere in the timeline we have been given. Let us talk about what is actually under the ice. Because this is where the story stops being theoretical. Since the 1990s, satellite radar and seismic survey technology has produced increasingly detailed maps of the Antarctic landscape beneath the ice. What those maps show is not a featureless rock surface. What they show is a landscape of enormous complexity. River systems. Former river systems, carved into the bedrock over millions of years of flowing water. Lake systems. Lake Vostok, which sits beneath 4 kilometers of ice in East Antarctica, is approximately the size of Lake Ontario. It has been isolated under the ice for somewhere between 15 and 34 million years according to the official estimate, and it is a liquid lake, not frozen, kept liquid by geothermal heat from below. In 2012, a Russian drilling team broke through the ice into Lake Vostok after 20 years of drilling. They brought up water samples from the lake. The water samples contained microbial life that matched nothing in any existing biological database. Life forms that had been isolated under 4 kilometers of ice for potentially 30 million years, evolving in complete isolation from the rest of the planet's biology. The discovery of life in Lake Vostok was reported. It was noted. It was considered significant. And then the conversation moved on because the implications of entirely novel life forms isolated under ancient ice do not fit neatly into the scientific communications model. There are at least 400 subglacial lakes mapped beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. 400 bodies of liquid water sitting under kilometers of ice, connected to each other by subglacial river systems, forming a hidden hydrological network of a scale that most people do not know exists. And the subglacial topography surveys have revealed something else. In certain regions of Antarctica, the landscape beneath the ice shows features that are difficult to account for through standard geological processes alone. Structural regularities. Linear formations. Elevated features with geometric characteristics that, in any other context, would prompt investigation. In Antarctica, they are described as geological in origin and the investigation stops there. Now let us talk about the official story and when it changed. Because it did change. Specifically and deliberately. And the change happened at a very particular moment in history. Antarctica was officially sighted for the first time in 1820 by 3 separate expeditions almost simultaneously. A British naval officer named Edward Bransfield, an American seal hunter named Nathaniel Palmer, and a Russian naval officer named Fabian von Bellingshausen all recorded sightings of the Antarctic continent within weeks of each other in January and February of 1820. The official exploration of Antarctica began slowly after that. The first confirmed landing on the continent was in 1895. The first expeditions into the interior came in the early 1900s. Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton became the explorers associated with Antarctica in popular history. But the treaty that governs Antarctica, the agreement that determines who can go there and what they can do when they get there, was not written until 1959. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in Washington in December of 1959. 12 nations signed it. The treaty froze all territorial claims on the continent, prohibited military activity, and established Antarctica as a zone dedicated to scientific research and cooperation. It also effectively placed the entire continent under international supervision with no single nation holding ultimate authority and no path for independent investigation outside the treaty framework. The treaty was written in 1959. The same year Charles Hapgood was finishing his analysis of the Piri Reis Map. The same year the implications of the 1949 seismic survey of the subglacial coastline were becoming clear. That timing may be coincidence. But consider what the Antarctic Treaty actually does in practical terms. It means that any significant discovery made in Antarctica must be processed through an international scientific framework controlled by 12 major world powers. It means that independent researchers do not go to Antarctica. It means that whatever is found there, whatever the ice reveals as it shifts and as drilling and survey technology improves, is filtered through institutional structures before it reaches public knowledge. And institutions, as this channel has shown repeatedly, are very good at deciding what the public needs to know. Here is what we do know, from sources that have not been suppressed but simply have not been connected publicly. The ice sheet is melting. This is not disputed. The rate of Antarctic ice loss has accelerated significantly in the last 30 years. Regions of the continent that were stable for centuries are now showing active melting and calving. The geography of Antarctica is changing. As it changes, things are being revealed. In 2016, a series of satellite images of the Wilkes Land region of East Antarctica showed what appeared to be large structural anomalies beneath shallow ice cover. The images circulated briefly in alternative research communities and were then addressed by mainstream sources as geological formations. The explanation was given quickly and the question was considered closed. In 2018, a survey team working in the Transantarctic Mountains found fossilized plant material, including fossilized trees, at a site near the South Pole. The trees were identified as belonging to a forest that existed approximately 260 million years ago, during a warm period in Antarctica's very deep past. 260 million years ago is safely outside the range of human history. But the pollen layers in the deep ice cores are not 260 million years old. And the Piri Reis Map was drawn in 1513. And Buache drew his map in 1737. And somewhere in the Turkish National Library in Istanbul, the source maps that Piri Reis copied from when he drew his 1513 chart are still held in a collection that international researchers have been requesting access to for 60 years. Access has been granted partially. Certain materials have been examined. The oldest source materials, the ones Piri Reis himself described as coming from very ancient collections, have not been made fully available. The ice is melting. The subglacial surveys are continuing. The drilling teams are going deeper every year. At some point something will come up from under the ice that cannot be explained in the terms the official story provides. When that happens, the conversation that should have started in 1959 will have to begin. The continent at the bottom of the world has been locked behind treaty, logistics, and institutional control for 60 years. The ice that was supposed to have covered it for 15 million years is pulling back. And the maps that should not exist have been sitting in libraries for 500 years waiting for someone to take them seriously. Something is under the ice. The official story has been changing slowly for decades, one quiet revision at a time, hoping nobody notices how much ground it has already given up. We notice. And here is what makes all of this matter right now, today, in a way it did not matter 20 years ago. The tools exist. The technology that can map what is under the ice, drill through 4 kilometers of frozen water, and image the subglacial landscape in detail that was impossible a generation ago, all of that technology exists and is being used. The Lake Vostok drilling project took 20 years. When the Russian team finally broke through in 2012 they were drilling at -89 degrees Celsius, in the most remote location on Earth, through ice that had not been touched since it formed millions of years ago. They did it. They reached the water. They found life that matched nothing in any database. That discovery alone should have changed the conversation permanently. If life can evolve in complete isolation under 4 kilometers of ice for 30 million years, what else has been developing in the 399 other subglacial lakes that have been mapped but not drilled? What is in the subglacial rivers connecting them? What is in the sediments at the bottom of Lake Vostok itself, below the water, in the rock and soil that has been sitting under that lake since before any human civilization existed? Nobody is publicly asking these questions with the urgency they deserve. The ice cores go back 800,000 years in the deepest samples currently analyzed. 800,000 years of atmospheric history, climate data, and biological material captured in frozen layers. The information in those cores is extraordinary. And the things found in those cores that do not fit the official model are documented in technical literature that most people never read and that institutional science never synthesizes into the larger story. Because the larger story is the problem. The larger story, if you take all of it together, does not look like the history we have been given. It looks like something much older, much larger, and much more complex was happening on this planet before the civilization we know about began. Something that knew where Antarctica was. Something that could navigate to it, survey it, and produce maps accurate enough to be copied and used by Ottoman admirals and French geographers 1500 years later. And then it stopped. Or it was stopped. Or something happened that ended it so completely that by the time European civilization was sailing the Southern Ocean in the 1800s, the knowledge of what was at the bottom of the world had been reduced to fragments in old libraries and geometric accuracy in maps that nobody could explain. The official story says none of this happened. The official story says Antarctica has been frozen and empty and irrelevant to human history since long before humans existed. The Piri Reis Map says otherwise. The subglacial coastline surveys say otherwise. The deep ice cores say otherwise. The story has been changing for 60 years. One small revision at a time. One quietly updated estimate. One carefully worded academic paper that acknowledges what the evidence shows without acknowledging what the evidence means. They will keep changing it slowly for as long as they can. But the ice is melting faster than the story can keep up with.